This hour, we delve into the ongoing political crisis in Kenya, where opposition leader Raila Odinga has called for a day of action against President William Ruto's government. This has led to violent clashes between protesters and police, resulting in over 200 arrests and one student killed. The protests were sparked by the country's severe cost of living crisis, with high prices for basic goods, a plunging currency, and a drought that has left millions hungry. This crisis has led to widespread anger among Kenyans who are struggling despite promises by President Ruto to work for the ordinary hustler during his campaign for the August election. According to police, more than 200 protesters, including 2 opposition MPs, have been arrested in connection to Monday's Day of Showdown protests. The clashes also resulted in the injuring of 31 police officers. The political situation in Kenya has been tense since the election, with Odinga claiming that Ruto's win was fraudulent and denouncing his government as illegitimate. The recent protests are the first major outbreak of political violence in the country since Ruto took office months ago, and they highlight the deep divisions and grievances that continue to simmer beneath the surface. On the square today, we will discuss the causes and implications of these protests, as well as the broader political and economic challenges facing Kenyans right now. My name is Kemini Amano. Joining our gathering today is Joseph Kioko. He is a political and public policy analyst based in Nairobi, Kenya. Joseph, you're welcome to the square.
Thank you, Kamini. Thank you very much.
So first things first, let's get this out of the way. What would you say is the mood, the atmosphere in Nairobi, specifically where you are today, with the protests in the review?
You know, this was it was a one-off thing, in truthfulness, and it was not widespread in Nairobi. It was happening in predominantly areas where one would call the barracks of the opposition leader support base, which is Kibra, just across from where I am, and certain parts in Madare where he has support. But by and large, the entirety of Nairobi was peaceful. People were at home. Nobody wanted to take a risk to take his car out so that it would be stolen or burnt. Other parts of Kenya, you see, Kenya has 47 political counties. Now, only 2 counties were engaged in skirmishes. Kisumu, which is a bedrock of the Right Honorable Raila's support base, and sections of Nairobi. Now, the other parts of Kenya, it was business as usual. It is something that people didn't understand. It was premature, to say the very least.
I see. So I want you to, again, talk to us about some of the concerns raised by the leadership of the opposition, which sparked the protest. Talk to us about what you make about that.
I think we need some level of honesty in our politics. And that's the message that we as Kenyans want to pass out to the rest of the world. Now, the question of rising cost of living, you know, the cost of living has been increasing over time. It didn't happen the moment when President Ruto became president, and then all of a sudden the price of items started going up, the value of the dollar kept going up. These things didn't just happen overnight. It has been an accumulation of issues over a longer period of time, dating back to the time when the Right Honorable Raila Odinga and the former President Uhuru were in a political cohabitation. They were basically running the government, and these prices and this cost of living was increasing under their watch. And no demonstration was ever held at that particular time. No concern was ever given at that particular time. We were told, let's get over the elections and then we will deal with it. Now there's a government that is trying to deal with it. Is it working hard towards getting it? We give it benefit of doubt. It's only 6 months or 7 months since it came into power. Not much can have been achieved by that particular time. We are yet to hear its budget policy statement to understand what direction it is going to go to. So in all fairness, there's an element of let us allow this government to have room to function properly. Then we can judge it. I think, but we all agree, things are expensive. The cost of living is increasing. It needs to be checked. But the people in power have a duty. They are duty bound in ensuring that these challenges, societal challenges, are addressed. That's their responsibility. They have that mandate for 5 years. You cannot overthrow a government because of increasing cost of living. It is the challenges that we're all going to meet. Other concerns which are being raised by the Azimio leadership, issues regarding the legitimacy of the election of President Ruto. Yeah. In truthfulness, it's neither here nor there. Our Kenyan electoral process is well defined. We have a constitution that we respect. It enumerates what happens in the case of a political contest. Processes are defined. You go to the Supreme Court where you bring out your evidence. All of that played out immediately after the elections of August 9th. And we saw that. And all Kenyans were glued on TV, waiting for this evidence that the Right Honorable Raila Odinga would have and say, this is where my victory was stolen. That did not happen.
On that score, what the Azimio leadership has asked for is to inspect the data in the service, which, the Supreme Court denied them. They have made that a key point of why they are protesting and are calling for the 2 times a week protest among the Kenyan people. Your take on that?
Let me tell you, that you need to see the disingenuousness about that conversation. In 2017, when the NASA coalition was there competing with Uhuru and Ruto versus Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka, that clamor of opening the server to access that data was there. The moment the Honorable Raila Odinga had a handshake with President Uhuru, conveniently that conversation was forgotten. It has reappeared again in this election after he has lost. If there was a genuine attempt in addressing the question of server, then this clamor should have happened during the lifetime of the handshake. The Right Honorable Raila Odinga should have pursued that conversation in a very logical way to deal with the question of data and the server issue. Secondly, is to understand that in the elections of 2017, there was a court ruling that stated that the primary data of truth is the data that is found in the polling station. What is actually written in the polling station is supreme, over and above what can be found in the electronic data or in the servers. Now, today, instead of the Right Honorable Odinga saying, let us go and look at the polling station's outcome, what is called from 34A, which is the primary source of truth in our electoral contest. He is keeping that and saying, now let us go to the server. Because in any case, whatever you find in the server, if it contradicts what is found in the polling station, the data in the polling station is supreme. Now, the Honorable Raila knows that because a court ruling of 2017 of the minor KI group did establish that as the primary source of truth in any electoral contest. Now, what is happening here? This is just something to whip up emotions, that our elections were stolen.
Well, but it isn't really, because as you said, there could be need to compare what ended up in the server to what was collected at the polling station. And so when the opposition that has raised concerns is denied access to the server on intellectual property grounds for something that Kenya has bought and paid for, it does raise concerns, doesn't it?
But you see, that's now cherry-picking the argument, my dear. If you don't see the holistic conversation, where it starts and where it ends, then you can get carried away by that conversation. Now, when you say intellectual property, when you go to court, the court is also keen on ensuring that you don't go through a fishing expedition. Pick out the areas you think there were incidences of malpractice, bring them to the court, let them be used as a sample basis for which an election can be nullified. That's a procedure in the Supreme Court. Now, the Azimio people presented 16 constituencies and the polling stations in those constituencies. This was a thorough scrutiny was ordered by the Supreme Court. where Azimio sent their representative, the Kenya Kwanza Coalition sent their representative, and a thorough scrutiny was formed, looking for what you've just claimed, inconsistency between data in the server vis-a-vis data in the polling station. At the end of that scrutiny, no discrepancy was found. Now, everybody has a right to query, but there must be an end to an electoral process. There must be an end. Otherwise, as a country, we cannot always be going through a loop. You go into an election, you lose the election, you discredit the process, you are told to adduce evidence, you do not bring evidence, and then you still go back to your gullible supporters and say, no. Although there is no evidence, the High Court of Kenya has people who are bad. The IEBC has bad people or corrupt people. We ask you, bring evidence. If you cannot bring evidence, then we cannot live in a situation where it is your word against institutions that have been generated or created by the Constitution.
Speaking of the IEBC, they have also raised concerns about the recruitment into the IEBC. Essentially, they are claiming that President Ruto will be populating the IEBC with his own people. They want those who resigned en masse back. What are your readings into this? Legitimate concerns?
Again, and this, I'm not being anti the demands of the Right Honorable Raila Odinga. No. But it must be looked in history again. When they were appointing these 4 commissioners, the law they used stated that political parties will have the majority of people that they choose. Other stakeholders were kept out of that process. Now, these 4 commissioners who resigned after their claim of opaqueness, these 4 were solely nominated by President Uhuru and the Right Honorable Raila Odinga. Our president right now, Ruto, did not play a part in selecting those 4 additional commissioners. He had no role, yet he was a player in that process. At that particular time, the Right Honorable Raila did not find conflict. He did not find that this process is flawed because he believed it served his interest. Now, the shoe is on the other hand. What President Ruto has done is that he went into parliament and amended that law of creating of the selection panel and brought in more. He brought in more participants into the political process. Additional people were put from representing the Law Society of Kenya. The churches and multisectoral sectors were brought in. Political parties without parliamentary representation were brought in. So there was a wider array of stakeholders who were brought in to act and to select the selection panel that will go and select or nominate IEBC commissioner. It is a wider conversation or stakeholder management thing that was brought in, as opposed to what happened in 2021 under the watch of the Right Honorable Raila. Now, these inconsistencies, my dear, these inconsistencies is what we need to talk about. Otherwise, we'll always be making 2 steps forward, 4 steps backwards in our country. And it hurts because right now, the entire continent of Africa thinks Kenya is burning. Yet they are only
absolutely, and that was going to lead me to my next question. Is this causing any divide? Because conversation are simmering. People are asking that if you cannot allow us to have what we want, then we want to secede from the country Kenya. How serious is that conversation in your country?
No, it's not there. Nobody is seceding. I mean, in truthfulness, nobody is seceding because we are a competitive society. Elections are, by their very nature, competitive and divisive. But we have this ability of coming together as a country after elections and saying, let us focus on development. Now, something has been brought, a new culture has been brought into Kenya, where people are having this conversation of there is no winner take all. But they must be number 1, and there must be number 2. And number 2, once you commit yourself into an electoral process, you must be willing to accept you are either going to win or you're going to lose. And when you lose, you must allow other people who have been elected or who have been mandated by people to run their affairs in government. Now, whatever is happening now is a question of somebody who has played this card over and over again. In the elections of 1997, he left and joined the ruling party KANU under Moi. In the elections of 2007, when he lost, chaos was created. He came in through a negotiated arrangement and some Kenyans died. In 2013, he threatened President Uhuru. They did a handshake. He goes into an election. He loses. He comes in through back door. Now, it is bad.
Does it make him lose political credibility? Does it make him distrustful, untrustworthy, maybe?
There's an element that we want to call it out for Kenya, because these things happened and worked out 20 years ago. There's a new voter demographic of Kenya who are asking, once elections are over and you've been subjected to a court process and the court adjudes that these elections are clean, fair, and square, I mean, there will be administrative challenges. That's not an issue, yeah? But if by and large the credibility of the elections are certified, then people must agree to lose. I see. Let's
younger people. Let's welcome.
And younger people. Younger people who are coming in and becoming voters are saying these tricks just don't add up.
I see. Let's welcome our second guest on the program today. Alan Odero is also a political analyst based in Nairobi, Kenya. Well, my understanding is Alan isn't ready. When Alan is ready, we'll bring him into the conversation. So let's continue with Joseph. Joseph, we've spoken a lot about the concerns raised by the opposition leader and his supporter base. I want us to look at the event that took place yesterday during the protest. Did it have to get as violent as it is? And what is your analysis of how things degenerated yesterday?
I think first it's a sad case because there's a young boy from Maseno University who died. There are some people, Kenyans, who are hurt in the process. It doesn't need to get there. In truthfulness, nobody needs to keep dying in every electoral cycle in Kenya or even in the African political setup. Could the police have handled this thing in a different way? I think there is need to manage the culture of picketing and demonstrations in our country because it's a constitutionally enshrined right in terms of people need to picket and people need to demonstrate. But also the people who are organizing this demonstration are duty-bound to ensure that the demonstration and picketing do not turn out to be destructions of property. It does not turn out into hooliganism. It does not turn out into opportunities to loot and destroy other people's property. Now, that balance between genuine political grievances that can be expressed through picketing vis-a-vis holding the leadership of this demonstration to account so that personal property and people's property are not affected, that balance needs to be agreed. Otherwise, as a country, like I said, we keep missing our milestones.
Very well. We have Alan now. Alan Odero is a political analyst based in Nairobi, Kenya. Alan, you're welcome to the square. Unfortunately, we've begun the conversation without you. We've had quite a chunk of it already. But quickly, I want to hear your take on, the calls for demonstration, but also while you're doing it, I'd like you to react to what some critics have said, that while there may be germane economic concerns in Kenya, it would appear that the opposition is taking advantage of the situation for political expediency. Talk to us about what you think.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Apologies for joining the show late. So just part of political strategy, Raila Odinga is following in the same script that William Ruto used during the presidential campaigns. Basically, a weaponization of the valid economic issues on the ground. The economy is in a mess right now, but that's shouldn't be entirely blamed on William Ruto. Inherited a fairly messed up economy from the previous regime that was led by Uhuru Kenyatta. So Raila has basically taken advantage of the discontent prevailing around the country, both from his supporters and then also a large chunk of those who voted in William Ruto are disappointed by the slow pace of economic reforms. So in as much as there have been issues around questions about Ruto's fairness in terms of how he was elected. The Azimio coalition has rejected so far. They don't recognize Ruto as the legitimate president of Kenya. So they proceeded to jump on the issue, the complaints on the ground. It's a way of reinventing Raila Odinga reinventing himself politically. And it's true, he's taken advantage of the issues that have been raised, credible issues that have been raised by the cross-sections of the people around the country. So in terms of how potent the strategy is used, should be viewed in terms of the disruption that happened in the capital city. The other day, the police declared the rally to not be legally called and barred the protesters from accessing the CBD. So to the extent that it disrupted the economic well-being, the economic lifeline of the capital city and by extension the country, it's kind of exerting pressure on the William Ruto side of the government to kind of extend an olive branch, and probably people move towards a negotiating table. So for me, it's basically a strategy to kind of force the incumbent regime to have a negotiation or maybe a conversation about one or two issues.
I see. So then that will put the government in a very difficult situation, because we have people on the ruling party side who have described the protesters and the opposition as economic terrorists, and for which reason creates the impression that will seem to understate the difficulties going on in Kenya at the moment, and it will put the government in a very tough spot, because and for that matter, so here's the question, for that matter, how would you expect the government's response to this to go in such a way that it will not only be a response to the opposition, but also one that will appeal to the Kenyan people?
Thank you very much. So far, based on the commentary around, it's unfortunate that people have reduced the protest and the response by the executive government to be kind of a tiff between incumbent President Ruto and Raila Odinga. But we are losing we are making a mistake, or maybe in the sense that based on this back and forth, we are losing an opportunity to have real conversations about what ails the country. So we hope that so far Ruto has extended kind of a change in heart. Initially, he adopted a tough stance of saying that he won't have any space he won't reward blackmail and impunity. But so far, last Sunday evening, was speaking at a child religious service, he made a statement to the effect that he's willing to engage in dialogue for the sake of the country.
Isn't that a hand he's been extending? Isn't that a hand he's been extending for a while now? Do you think it would work this time?
Okay, the hand that he's been extending basically hasn't been it hasn't really been coached in the manner that it was the other weekend. It basically made an indirect reference to the impending protests and demonstrations. So far, Raila Odinga and the Azimio coalition have made a list of demands about the need for a stop to the recruitment process of the new Electoral Commission, to pave way for dialogue and to have a bipartisan process. A return of the subsidies that have so far been removed by the government in line with its economic reforms management strategy. And then he's also speaking that by this maybe now a minor issue in terms of the legitimacy of Ruto's election. So far, a cross-section of the religious leaders across the country, political players, looking at the kind of the economic, the negative impact that the protests had on the other day. The capital city was basically a no-go zone for the better part of the day, minimal economic activity, losses to the economy. So perhaps that's where the opposition hits the executive where it pains the most, disrupt the economy, get things at a standstill. We saw the travel advisories by the Western embassies based on in Nairobi. So if it hurts that badly, the Greek government will certainly be compelled into extending an olive branch and meeting the opposition in the negotiating table. So what remains to be seen, or maybe what we need to be overly concerned at the moment, we need to be about the interests of the two individuals, or will the aspirations of the common man find space at the negotiating table? But so now that the focus is on the economic reforms, we hope that certainly conversations about the economy, the subsidies, the cost of living will certainly find a place at the table. But at the moment, Raila Odinga has now escalated it. Last evening he said that they now have two protests in a week on every Monday and Thursday. So basically, this is going to exert more pressure on William Ruto. So we hope that
I would want us to look at that call for the twice a week demonstrations in Kenya when we come back. Stay with us, gentlemen. Welcome back to the square. Today we are discussing Kenya because the opposition party has called for a twice-a-week demonstration over there in the country, asking for the removal of the President William Ruto based on some concerns that they have raised, including the legitimacy of the August 2022 elections. We've been discussing this with Joseph Kioko, who is a political and public policy analyst based in Nairobi, Kenya. We also have Alan Odero, who is also a political analyst based in Kenya. And Joseph, I come to you now. Just the same question I asked Alan before we went on that break. The government would have to find a common ground where you can address the germane concerns of the economic situation in Ghana and also deal with your political opponent, who they believe is taking advantage of the situation to score political points. So now, what would be your advice to government? What is the way in between the two now?
You see, politics, the classical definition of politics is about who gets what, when, and how. And government is at the center of politics. The avenues of public discourse are defined, and policy formulation are defined. You go to parliament, you go to people, the cabinet articulates itself. Now, as it is right now, this government or this president will be seeking re-election after 5 years. So for his second term, he needs to serve Kenyans well. He made promises in the campaign. Promises that when you look at it today, they are suffering, they're getting caught up in a lot of headwinds. It's not as smooth sailing as he made people believe. He is duty-bound to serve Kenyans. He is duty-bound to bring innovative solutions to the problems, the economics, the social economic problems that we are facing as a country. That's his responsibility. That's his role as the president. And he has his cabinet and he has the MPs to bring out that agenda that people hear him and accept his policy. Now, if he fails to do that, we as a country, because on the 9th of August 2027, on the 2nd August, the second Tuesday of August 2027, we Kenyans shall go to an election. And if he did not perform, we'll kick him out and vote in for another person. So these parameters of checks and balances are there. Now, in terms of the opposition, what avenues do they have and what should they do? I think the role of checking and keeping the government on course is the primary mandatory business of the opposition. They need to speak out when this government fails to do its work. They need to speak out against bad policies that this government is effective. They need to play their role, as the term opposition is all about. They are the alternate government. Now, in the process of doing all of that, and because we are Democrats by nature, we must accept and live within the tenets of the 60 months period that any presidential candidate or any government enjoys. Build up your support base in the best possible manner. Sell your agenda in the best possible manner. If you sell propaganda, it will be debunked. If the government sells lies, Kenya will be able to see them. Now, we are in that phase, and it's not new. That is what democracy is all about.
Right.
Now, this extrajudicial mechanism of saying 7 months down the lane that Ruto is an illegitimate president. And yet we have a democracy that is governed by a new constitution that we all participated in enacting. And we put safeguards to ensure that there is no illegitimate president who sits in the seats of power. Mm-hmm. Basically, you are holding this country at a ransom by constantly issuing statements which are not based on facts. But because you have a loyal base, of people who will not question your mantra, they will come out. And because there are many youths who are vulnerable, who will not question what you are saying, and they see the opportunities of looting through the democratic demonstration processes, then they join in.
Very well. Let's take the conversation to Alan now. Alan, coach this deepened divisions in the Kenyan polity, in the Kenyan society, or perhaps even cause cracks where hitherto there were no divisions. Alan, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Okay, just a moment, sorry.
We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. I think that was a little an error with my audio. So I was saying that democracy, liberal democracy, generally competitive. So divisions that we're experiencing right now, that's normal for Kenya. Is usually a overly political country. Between the end of the elections, the next election, we never have a stop in terms of whereby people say that we now have maybe a semblance of calm. There are always rallies and the political discussion. So far, this is not out of the ordinary. However, I think I want to disabuse the notion that protests or picketing are entirely wrong. It's true there are negative connotations about protests in this country, given what usually happens in terms of opportunistic characters taking advantage of maybe looting business and everything. Then the trigger happy cops, police officers shooting dead young men. Like we lost maybe 1 or 2 young people the other day in circumstances that are not yet clear. But anyway, the constitution, sovereignty lies with the people in terms of Article 1 of our constitution. So Kenyans can exercise sovereignty directly, like they are doing right now through protesting, or indirectly to elected representatives. But however, there is a need to ensure that there's decency in terms of the protests that we carry out. But so far, I accept that we are an evolving democracy. So, but either way, in terms of where we go from here, it's true that this should be the last resort in terms of going to the streets. The elected members of parliament should pursue, based on their 3 roles, legislation, representation, and oversight, they should use the platform of parliament to put the government to check. But why the opposition has resorted to cease protest? There's a perception in this country that the incumbent William Ruto is kind of overseeing the certain defections whereby a number of MPs, after the Supreme Court made a determination to validate his election, quite a number of people crossed over from the Azimio coalition to the other side. So the opposition, the word out on the street is that the executive has bought all the MPs. So without any credible numbers in parliament to stand up to the numerical strength of the executive or maybe the incumbent regime, the result is to go to the streets, go to the people. So in the hope that the pressure will kind of institute guardrails to the direction that the government has taken in terms of the executive programs, the decisions in terms of the economic reforms and management. So
very well.
Looking at the
maybe allow me to
sorry, go ahead.
Indeed, Joseph, I know you want to say something, but while you're at it, I want us to also look at the call for the twice-a-week demonstrations. Tomorrow is Thursday. We'll live to see whether or not that call will happen. But if it does, what do you think the impact will be on the country, on the economic situation in Ghana, in Kenya? I beg your pardon. Kenya. Talk to us about that.
Okay, maybe 2 things. Democracy must be allowed to evolve. And we cannot live in a situation where we are in a hopeless situation. The opposition members of parliament need to up their game. They need to put this government and push it and bring alternative conversation onto the table. Let Kenyans see that they tried and they lost. Then you can come back to Kenyans and say, you know, on this particular bill, we were right. This guy had the number. This guy is like this. But as it is right now, there is an anticipatory state of hopelessness that Ruto has already taken over. Therefore, let us go back to the people. 7 months ago, we were the people. And the people say, these are our very best Kenyans who can sit in parliament to legislate. We have not seen no bill from the opposition that is saying this is what needs to be done. So the demonstrations are premature. Yes, we are constitutionally allowed to demonstrate, but at this, it's a question of timing. And at this particular time, we have yet to exhaust the channels of political democracy that we've captured in the Constitution. Now, the Right Honorable Raila and the Azimio Brigade has called for elections, for demonstration twice a week, starting next week. Like Alan is saying, this is just to strong arm tactics. You know, the demonstrations will be in Nairobi, predominantly in Nairobi. The governor of Kisumu is complaining because all demonstrations somehow, Kisumu city has never grown out of the image that it is normally where people demonstrate. So Kisumu City is suffering. You saw in the Monday demonstrations, governors from other counties were coming to Nairobi. The governor of Siaya was in Nairobi. The governor of Homa Bay was in Nairobi. They left their counties very peaceful, but they came to disrupt business in Nairobi. Now, on Monday, again, we'll wait and see what will happen. But I can tell you, whatever is being sought, like Alan said, these issues did not start with the Ruto government. They started earlier. And if it's a selfish discussion of a new image of a handshake, I do not think President Ruto will be onto it. If there is genuine leadership wanting to talk, let the genuine leadership want to talk. Let them come to the table and bring their ideas. But you cannot keep saying, we are going to fight our way to State House. We are going to fight our way to open up servers. Things that when Raila Odinga was in bed with Uhuru Kenyatta, never articulated in those 3 years in power. Kenyans are not foolish. I think this thing must be disabused. Because every time, every election cycle, if as a country, there will always be violence, even our capacity to attract investors diminishes. Because somebody will be saying Kenya is a 60-month investment opportunity. How do you make money in Kenya? Yet when elections come, one person will cause chaos. Those conversations are what needs to be abused, to be disabused. We are a democratic society. We have institutions that respect the rule of law. We participated in election. A clear winner was, it was a closely contested election, but a winner was determined. Our elections say 50 plus 1. So if you get 7 million and 1, that one makes you the president.
I see. Now, Alan, just take us home on this one. If or when those demonstrations resume in Kenya, we saw what happened between protesters and the police. What would be your advice to both sides of the divide, the police and the protesters, on their conduct whenever or however the protest takes place from next week?
So, ordinarily, it's the police overreaction that escalates the situations. I think that Ruto has played right into Raila Odinga's hands. Raila thrives in a crisis, you know. Raila, you remember before his handshake with Uhuru significantly damaged his reputation across the country. So the new Raila, this is the vintage Raila that the country has known, is kind of undergoing political reinvention. Even by the police throwing tear gas hurling tear gas canisters and disrupting his procession like they did the other day, only escalates this situation, only makes him more popular and grants him a wider audience. Had Ruto been smart enough, had I been one of Ruto's advisors, I would have told him, allow these people to have their peaceful protest in the CBD. Maybe they will just spend maybe 2 hours. Then the protesters can't stay in the CBD for far too long. But now here's whereby it's running battles the entire day, disruption of businesses. Allow them to get into the CBD, the extended area where they say that they're going to picket around, whether it's a stadium or wherever it is. They'll have the speakers address them. Then a rally basically can't take the entire day. It will end, and then there'll be that build up onto the next time. So with that, we'll lessen the disruption of the economic activity and loss of lives. But moving forward, I think Ruto is gradually being pushed towards considering the option of a dialogue, but dialogue in whose interest. Kenyans right now are super concerned about the economic reforms and economic management, but people saw the wrong direction that this country took under the handshake with Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta, whereby the opposition kind of got co-opted, you know. We suffered seriously as a country. At this moment, the objective part of this country is not entirely keen on a handshake. Raila supporters believe that we are pushing Ruto to the corner. We believe we are going to make some gains. But let me be clear that Ruto was validly elected as per the Supreme Court.
I see.
Raila right now needs to move away from the talk of flawed election. Kenya is past that. The conversation right now needs to be in terms of the economic management.
I'm not sure he would agree with you. I don't think Raila would agree with you. But gentlemen, thank you so much for your insights on the subject matter. Joseph and Alan joined us from Nairobi. Thank you so much. I'm grateful.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.